The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. Francis Scott Fitzgerald.
Author's Foreword.
What if there were an omnipotent and omnipresent God who agreed to answer any one question of yours, but only one question? What would you ask? For me, there's nothing more important and interesting than answering the question, what is life? Why? For several reasons. First, modern science still hasn't provided a clear answer to this question. It seems like there are answers, actually not just one answer, but an enormous number of different ones. In 2011, the well-known Israeli molecular biophysicist Edward Trifonov identified and analyzed 123 definitions of life given by scientists from various fields and disciplines. More than 100 definitions. Wow! This only shows that when it comes to what life is, we are still definitely far from definitiveness. The existing definitions of life are too applied. They strongly depend on the area of knowledge from which they are formulated. For example, the definitions given by biologists rely on certain properties inherent in life, such as organization, metabolism, homeostasis, growth, reproduction, responsiveness, and evolution. At the same time, biologists themselves realize that not all living beings exhibit all these properties, and viruses, according to biologists, fall into some gray zone of semi-living beings. Chemists have their own definitions. In their view, life is inseparably connected to various carbon polymers. But astrobiologists, primarily represented by NASA, call this approach carbon chauvinism and define life as a self-sustaining chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution. The chemical basis of life is questioned by scientists working on artificial intelligence and artificial life. Of course, all these definitions make sense. They are locally valid, but this only means that each of them describes no more than a particular branch of one vast, sprawling tree. To understand where this tree originates, we need to descend to its root, to the level of the principles of reality, that is, to the level of philosophy. Second, by clearly answering the question, what is life, we can also definitively answer other questions that have intrigued people for centuries, such as, what is the meaning of life? What is God? Do absolute good and evil exist? Where does life come from, and where does it go when it dies? Can artificial intelligence replace or conquer life? And many others. Third, this book will help us understand what forms of life we might discover in space, and most importantly, help us figure out how far humanity can go in uncovering the mysteries of the universe. Fourth, by answering the question, what is life, we can take a completely new perspective on quantum mechanics and nuclear physics. In recent years, many renowned scientists have increasingly spoken about a crisis in physics as a science. Widely accepted theories are struggling with a growing number of contradictions, and physics is in urgent need of new approaches to explain reality. Answering the question, what is life, will lead us to exactly such a new approach. Fifth, we will seriously reconsider the interpretations of the second law of thermodynamics, which currently push us toward the conclusion of an inevitable increase in entropy in the universe. I hope this book will spark an unseen dialogue with readers whose eyes light up at the temptation to discover something new, to ponder something they've never thought of before, and to debate new ideas and meanings with the author. So, onward, dear friends.
Introduction.
The title of this book contains the phrase, changing the paradigm. What does that mean? First, let's define paradigm. In 1962, American historian and philosopher of science Thomas Kuhn, in his work, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, argued that science does not progress through a continuous and sequential accumulation of knowledge. Kuhn asserts that the path of science to truth is never and cannot be straightforward. The evolution of scientific knowledge happens in stages, and at each stage, the scientific community adopts a certain set of concepts and mental models, which is what we call a paradigm. Within the framework of this paradigm, they develop corresponding postulates and standards, propose suitable theories, plan appropriate research methods, and interpret the resulting data accordingly. Now, what does changing paradigm mean? The stage of scientific development described above usually lasts for a certain period, sometimes decades, sometimes centuries, until scientific observations begin to seriously contradict the original set of concepts and mental models that form the foundation of the paradigm. The emergence of such contradictions marks a crisis in this stage and triggers the beginning of the next one, which gives rise to a new paradigm. For example, astronomy long evolved under the geocentric paradigm, meaning it was based on the concept that the Sun and other planets revolve around the Earth. However, the work of Nicholas Copernicus gave birth to a new scientific paradigm, heliocentrism, which asserts that the Earth and other planets revolve around the Sun. It took only a few decades for all of European science to accept this new paradigm, but what tumultuous years those were! How many heated debates raged in European universities? How many scientific authorities were toppled from their pedestals? How many revelations and disappointments were experienced by both esteemed professors and their students? Thomas Kuhn referred to this extremely painful process as a change or shift of the paradigm. So, what is the current paradigm of life, and which set of concepts and mental models does this book challenge? At present, life is regarded as an active form of matter, which implies that there is also a passive form of matter, from which the bulk of the universe consists of. Modern science does not provide a clear explanation of how this passive form turns into an active one. It is simply accepted as an indisputable fact that the emergence of this active form is extremely unlikely, and that the universe is essentially a vast, lifeless, and mysterious. Nobody knows, is that a construction, formation, structure, which is also constantly degrading according to the second law of thermodynamics. Somewhere in the unremarkable corners of this vast and endlessly dreary graveyard, a few rare, solitary, and defenseless sprouts of life manage to emerge. In this book, I will refer to this concept as
the paradigm of the Great Graveyard.
So what's wrong with this paradigm? In recent years, scientists have been increasingly vocal about the crisis in physics as a science. For example, Bruno Mansoulier, one of the leading figures behind the Atlas experiment at the Large Hadron Collider and the head of the team searching for the Higgs boson, published an entire book titled Physics in Crisis, From Multiverses to Fake News. Mansoulier, along with several other renowned scientists with impressive citation indexes, claims that the widely accepted theories of physics are failing to cope with the growing number of contradictions. Primarily, this concerns the failure of the methodological principle of reductionism, which asserts that complex phenomena must be explainable using the laws governing simpler phenomena. According to physicists, this principle is violated because the so-called standard model of elementary particles, which describes the phenomena of the microworld quite well, is completely incapable of explaining the nature of gravity, i.e., the cosmic world, using the forces and interactions observed at the level of elementary particles. But the problems in physics don't stop there. enormous hopes were placed on the Large Hadron Collider experiment, which was expected to confirm a fundamental principle of quantum mechanics, supersymmetry. To recap, the idea of supersymmetry suggests that each elementary particle must have a symmetric antipartner, such as the electron-positron or neutrino-antineutrino pairs, and so on. So, while the Large Hadron Collider quickly confirmed the existence of the Higgs boson, the same cannot be said for supersymmetry. By the time this book was written, 8 years of active experiments, research, and exploration had gone by, and strangely enough, not a single positive result to show for it. According to Gianfrancesco Giudice, head of the theory division at CERN, the absence of supersymmetry necessitates a reconsideration of the core principles that have been used for decades to answer fundamental questions about the physical structure of the world. Another unsolvable problem from the standpoint of modern physics is the measurement paradox in quantum mechanics, that strange phenomenon where simply observing an experiment somehow affects its outcome. This leads to a single, spine-chilling conclusion for physicists. It seems that all observations must be considered subjective. A special place in the crowded gallery of theoretical problems in microphysics is occupied by the maddeningly complex string theory. As Bruno Manzulli puts it, it's floating in mid-air. None of its propositions have been backed by experiments so far. In the same league, we have the theory of multiple universes and a whole bouquet of hypothetical elementary particles, unconfirmed by any experiment. Years of research at the Large Hadron Collider haven't found a trace of them. Cosmology faces no fewer challenges. For example, in the very first months of operation, the James Webb Space Telescope discovered ultra-old galaxies, calling into question the entire Big Bang theory, upon which nearly all modern concepts of the structure and properties of the universe are built. In my deep conviction, the acknowledgement of all these, and various other issues, indicates a crisis in the ruling paradigm of the Great Graveyard. In this book you will be introduced to
The paradigm of the great life,
which offers new approaches capable of providing reasonable answers to many questions, including, of course, those listed above. I hope that over time, the paradigm of the great life will lead, if not to a complete rejection of the paradigm of the Great Graveyard, then at least to a thorough reconsideration of it.
and before concluding the introduction, I'd like to prepare readers for the inevitable challenges they will face while reading this book. The problem is that every paradigm consists of many diverse aspects. It's, by definition, an entire set of concepts and mental models. Within any such set of concepts and models, everything is interconnected and loops back on itself. One statement leads to another, from which a third follows logically, and this third in turn proves the truth of the initial statement. It is impossible to explain all these statements, conclusions, and proofs at once. You have to start somewhere, and at first glance, that starting point will inevitably seem unfounded. It's practically impossible to present a complex, interconnected, and interdependent system of concepts and ideas in a linear fashion. If you will, familiarizing yourself with a new paradigm is akin to watching someone assemble a jigsaw puzzle. You don't know what picture is being assembled before you, and it usually doesn't start to take shape for you until at least 60-70% of the pieces are in place. In the early stages of assembling the puzzle, some strange fragments of the image seem to hang in midair, and for quite a while, it's entirely unclear to you how they might connect. During this time, your boredom and frustration grow, and you may feel the urge to quit this seemingly pointless activity, but to overcome this stage, patience and perseverance will be required. However, by the end of the process, when the puzzle is nearly complete and the picture has emerged clearly, you'll quickly and with satisfaction place the final missing pieces in their proper spots. That said, it's entirely possible that the completed picture, the new paradigm, will seem surprisingly strange and even fantastic. This is an expected reaction, since you, the reader, willingly or unwillingly, are under the hypnotic spell of the prevailing paradigm of the great graveyard. The only thing that can help you break free from this spell and open yourself to new ideas and meanings is your inquisitive mind and healthy imagination.
Part 1. Basic Concepts.
The first thing we usually do when starting a jigsaw puzzle is to assemble the border, the frame. We piece together all its outer elements. The first part of this book can be viewed in the same way. So, don't expect to see the full picture at this stage. The assembled frame will only give you an idea of the overall size of the canvas. In this first part, the most basic concepts are introduced, which will serve as the foundation for all our subsequent reasoning. The reader will also be introduced to some fairly non-obvious ideas and will be led to interesting conclusions.
Chapter 1. Let's start with philosophy.
Unfortunately, it must be admitted that many people, for various reasons, have developed quite a dismissive attitude towards philosophy. They say it's just highbrow nonsense and verbal trickery, nothing concrete or comprehensible. And really, what could possibly be interesting to the modern person about, say, the philosophical debates of Plato and Aristotle from nearly 2,500 years ago? And yet, dear reader, forgive me, but we won't be able to avoid a bit of philosophical nitpicking. However, I hasten to reassure you, we won't have to dive into the vast and multifaceted kingdom of world philosophy. We'll limit ourselves to metaphysics, that branch of philosophy that studies the fundamental nature of reality and deals with such basic concepts as existence, identity, change, space and time, causality and effect, necessity, actuality, and possibility. Now, thanks to the aforementioned Plato and Aristotle, metaphysics offers two mutually exclusive views on how to approach these concepts. According to metaphysical realism, the concepts studied by metaphysics exist objectively, that is, independent of any observer. On the other hand, metaphysical anti-realism holds that all these concepts exist subjectively, meaning only within the observer's consciousness. Both realism and anti-realism are logically airtight within their own frameworks. For centuries and even millennia, neither has managed to definitively disprove the other. And yet, despite this apparent logical stalemate, modern exact sciences have firmly and unwaveringly aligned themselves with the axioms of metaphysical realism. The basic philosophical idea of this book is the hypothesis that
all phenomena of reality should be considered from both perspectives, metaphysical realism and anti-realism.
In other words, as we move forward in this book, we'll assume that the truth lies somewhere in the middle between realism and anti-realism, or rather, that it encompasses both concepts. It is simply two-faced, two as one, dual. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Where have we heard about duality before? Ah, yes, high school physics. Ring a bell? The physical nature of light is dual. Both the wave and particle theories of light coexist simultaneously, and both are correct. Let's keep this seemingly formal terminological similarity in mind. It'll come in handy later. We'll dive into all this in more detail in part 3 of this book, but for now, dear reader, you're simply invited to accept the following key postulate as the foundation for all the ideas to come.
Reality is twofold, dual, with two complementary sides, objective and subjective, and relying on only one side inevitably leads to an incomplete, one-sided understanding of things.
We'll break down exactly what this assumption means as we go along, but for now, let me congratulate you. The philosophical boredom has ended for now, and we're about to dive into the truly fascinating stuff that happens right at the intersection of the subjective and objective.
Summary.
Reality is twofold, dual, with two complementary sides, objective and subjective, and relying on only one side inevitably leads to an incomplete, one-sided understanding of things. All phenomena of reality should be considered from both perspectives, metaphysical realism and metaphysical anti-realism.
On energy and information.
So, reality is dual. It has both an objective and a subjective side. Let's try to clarify what each of these sides represents and how we'll interpret these heads and tails of reality going forward. First, let's talk about the objective side of reality, which we'll refer to as the realm of energy. The key property of the realm of energy is a strange and remarkable fact. The total amount of this energy in the universe doesn't change no matter the circumstances. It remains constant and unaltered, completely independent of time. And if you have the patience to stick with me until appendices, we'll discuss time in more detail. Reality, it seems, has this mysterious constant, the total amount of energy in the universe. And no matter what happens, what turns into what explodes or burns or fades out somewhere, this total amount of energy stays the same. In other words, energy is truly an objective, physical substrate. It can't be created or destroyed, only transformed. This amazing property of energy gives us the right to call the objective side of reality the realm of energy, because objective reality can't simply appear or disappear. And now, stepping into the spotlight, we have the concept of entropy, introduced by the German physicist and mathematician Rudolf Clausius in 1865. According to Clausius, thermodynamic entropy, the entropy of energy, is a measure of the disorder, irreversible dissipation, of energy. It turns out that we can never use all the energy in a system to do useful work. In simple terms,
the entropy of energy is an objective measure of its degradation.
We'll come back to entropy in appendices, but I needed to mention it now to build a bridge from the realm of energy to the realm of information, that is, to move on to the subjective side of reality. The fascinating thing is that the concept of entropy applies just as well to the scientific notion of information. However, in this case, informational entropy isn't seen as a measure of degradation, but as a measure of novelty. Let's start by figuring out what exactly this scientific concept of information is, how it differs from the everyday meanings of the term, and why information is subjective, that is, on what grounds it can represent the subjective side of reality. In everyday usage, information is a pretty vague concept. Sometimes it's associated with knowledge or facts, sometimes with data that needs to be stored or transmitted, or with some kind of meaning that needs to be extracted from something. But what does science have to say about it? In the 1940s, the brilliant American mathematician and engineer Claude Shannon developed the mathematical theory of information. Within this theory, as mentioned earlier, informational entropy is nothing more than a measure of novelty, or, in scientific terms, the degree to which uncertainty in a system is reduced.
The entropy of information is a subjective measure of its novelty.
For example, something around us has changed, become different, or appeared. Is it something new, never seen before, or is it something we've already encountered? This very newness is the essence of information entropy. In mathematical information theory, the amount of information is also defined, and it turns out to be nothing more than the degree of unexpectedness, or level of surprise, of an event. So, for instance, the event "the sun rises in the east" is not unexpected for you, which means the amount of information in it is close to zero. But if one day the sun suddenly rose in the west, that would be an extremely unexpected, and therefore extremely informative, event.
Wait a second. But what's completely unexpected for me might be nothing new for someone else.
Exactly, and that's just the point. Information is subjective. Another key idea from Claude Shannon's information theory is the concept of text. Yes, written out like this, with a capital T.
Text is an objectively existing physical medium that somehow reflects certain changes in the parameters and/or properties of matter.
In other words, a text includes not only the familiar text made up of letters, words, and sentences, but also the music drifting in from an open window, the strange footprints left in the sand by the river, a photograph of the Martian surface sent back by a rover, the smell of a burnt pie wafting through the house, the bits and bytes of data, note data, not information, stored in a computer's memory, and much, much more, anything that we as subjects can somehow receive and interpret. Now let's clarify what it means to perceive and interpret.
Where have you been today, my cat? At England's court, imagine that. And what did you see at the Queen's affair? I saw a mouse beneath the chair. Samuel Marshak.
As we can see, the cat's only conclusion from her time at the Queen's court was that she wouldn't starve in the royal palace, even if those two-legged creatures didn't feed her. Meanwhile, the Queen's third lady-in-waiting left the event with a single takeaway. High-waisted dresses would definitely be in fashion next year. But the Dutch ambassador was far more alarmed by an extraordinary hunch that the English Queen had a new favourite, and now a major order from the Royal Admiralty was in jeopardy. How is it that all three of these subjects were experiencing the same objectively existing text? The gathering of courtiers in the hall, the polite conversations as everyone waited for the Queen's entrance, the ceremonial appearance of Her Majesty, the formal greetings, and so on. They were indeed perceiving the same thing, except each interpreted it differently depending on their own subjective context. As you've probably guessed by now,
context is the sum of all the subject's knowledge and ideas about themselves and the surrounding world, the universe.
And therefore,
interpretation is the act of analyzing an objective text within the framework of a subjective context.
In our example, the cat's context filtered out everything from the text of the royal reception except for the mouse on the carpet. The frivolous lady-in-waiting's context only left her with the memory of high-waisted dresses. The Dutch ambassador's context led him to the conclusion that the Queen had a new favourite. Let's note for ourselves that with each repeated occurrence of the same event, the amount of information, that is, the degree of unexpectedness, quickly drops for us. The novelty fades, meaning the entropy of information increases, but at the same time, news turns into knowledge and skills. Living beings learn, expanding, enriching, and deepening their contexts. So, what have we clarified for ourselves? Text is objective. It is always some form of data on physical carriers. Context is subjective. It is what we commonly refer to as our knowledge and skills. Information is also subjective, and it essentially corresponds to what we call news or gossip. Information, as well as context, has no physical carrier. It exists only in the consciousness of various living beings. As for the fact that the consciousness of a living being is not a physical carrier, but something entirely different, we'll discuss that later, in the chapter What is God? In essence, the total sum of all individual contexts, knowledge and skills, of all living things in the universe makes up that second, subjective side of reality. From here on, we'll refer to this collective as the realm of information, as you can see, italicized and capitalized. Thus, within the paradigm of the great life, reality consists of two equal and complementary realms, the realm of energy and the realm of information. And life acts as a kind of two-sided membrane, dividing and organizing these two realms. Life, by interpreting the phenomena of the realm of energy, texts, organizes the realm of information. In other words, it learns, it understands how to better adapt to unexpected changes, discovers new laws, and so on. On the other hand, life, using the concepts of the realm of information, knowledge and skills, organizes the realm of energy, initially by developing living nature, and as it evolves, ploughing fields, building cities, constructing factories and nuclear power plants, launching spacecraft, and so on. In summary,
life organizes the realm of energy through information, and organizes the realm of information through energy.
Let's remember this conclusion. It will come in handy in part 2 of this book.
Summary.
Entropy of energy is the objective measure of its degradation. Entropy of information is the subjective measure of its novelty. The amount of information is the subjective degree of its unexpectedness. Text is an objectively existing physical medium that reflects certain changes in the parameters and/or properties of matter. Context is the sum of all the subject's knowledge and ideas about themselves and the surrounding world, the universe. Interpretation is the act of analyzing the objective text within the framework of a subjective context. Life organizes the realm of energy through information and organizes the realm of information through energy.
Chapter 3. What is the meaning of life?
Now that we've gained an understanding of what context is, we can rather easily answer a question that has occupied philosophers' minds for thousands of years. What is the meaning of life? Let's start by noting that this question sounds a bit vague. What kind of life are we talking about here? If we're only asking the superficial, what is the meaning of my personal life, then we get equally superficial and banal, ready-made answers from the bucket list category. Plant a tree, build a house, raise a child. A deeper question concerns the meaning of life, not just for me personally, but for humanity as a whole. But even that's still too narrow, because life is not limited to humanity alone. Indeed, we tend to forget that aside from us, living humans, there are also plenty of other living beings like all those animals and birds, plus all sorts of fish and various sea creatures, plus all kinds of bugs, mosquitoes and cockroaches, plus countless plants, fungi and lichens, plus a huge variety of bacteria, plus an unimaginable multitude of other beings and entities, known and unknown to science, not only on Earth, but on other, yet-to-be-discovered planets and worlds in the vast universe. It is the question of the meaning of this all-encompassing universal life, with a capital L, that we intend to answer now. Interested? In the previous chapter, we remember that context is the sum of all a subject's knowledge and ideas about themselves and the surrounding universe. Let's consider the context of the simplest creature we all know from school biology, the single-celled amoeba. Let's recall that this simple organism lives on the surface of freshwater bodies and feeds on various organic matter floating around in abundance. What kind of knowledge and ideas about the universe does the amoeba have? Here's what. From the perspective of these brainless amoebas, the universe consists of fresh water within certain ranges of temperature, pH levels, organic impurities, and so on, bordering on air, with its own variable composition and temperature ranges. And that's the entire model of the universe for the amoeba. How close is this model to reality? Definitely quite far, but it works 100% in the local context. More precisely, where this model of the universe becomes inadequate outside the boundaries of the pond, our amoebas don't survive, and as a result, don't live. Essentially,
a model of the universe is a reflection of a behavioral scheme that living beings adapt to maintain their homeostasis.
For example, when the acidity of the water rises to certain levels, amoebas are able to shrink, reducing the surface area of their membrane while simultaneously thickening it, which helps them survive. When the acidity exceeds a certain threshold, shrinking no longer helps, and the amoebas perish in agony. This means that the real universe has ceased to correspond to the amoeba's model of the universe. All right, but what about multicellular organisms? Or let's aim even higher, warm-blooded animals. From the perspective of, say, penguins, the universe is immeasurably more complex than it is for an amoeba. Now we have the cold, salty sea ocean, a variety of fish in that sea, ice, predatory orcas and sharks, and of course other penguins, both male and female. Again, the penguin's model of the universe is still fairly primitive, which is why our hero's habitat is limited to the coastlines of Antarctica and the southernmost regions of neighboring islands and continents. You could say that for hundreds of millions of years, nature has launched countless startups, families, classes, species, and subspecies of animals, plants, bacteria, and so on, which have been competing with each other for a place in the sun all this time. Each of these startups had its own business model, its particular model of the universe, and the more advantageous or accurate this model was, the higher that startup climbed in the food chain. Essentially, what's competing here are models of the universe, and the best, most accurate one wins. Let's immediately note the difference between the context we discussed in the previous chapter and the model of the universe. Context is individual. It's the set of knowledge and ideas about oneself and the universe belonging to a single living being, one specific amoeba or penguin. The model of the universe, however, is a broader concept. It's the average context shared by all members of a particular species, all amoebas or all penguins. We'll explore this distinction in more detail in part 2, but for now, to complete the picture, let's introduce another term.
Collective model of the universe. This is the most accurate representation of the universe that has emerged within a given ecosystem.
It would be a mistake to think that the most accurate model of the universe in the Earth's ecosystem has been shaped solely by human efforts. No, the collective model of the universe of Earth's ecosystem is the result of several billion years of evolution of Earth's life, starting with some prokaryotes and ending with modern humans. Humans, with the exception of my upstairs neighbor, are merely the champions. They've managed to arrive at a far more accurate model of the universe than any other known living beings. And yet the species Homo sapiens stands on the shoulders of all its ancestors who consumed plants and animals that also stand on the shoulders of their ancestors, and so on. Thus, the most accurate collective model of the universe is the product of the collective evolution of the entire ecosystem. And now it makes perfect sense to conclude life, with a capital L, is the competitive process of refining and perfecting the model of the universe. Or in other words,
life is the continuous process of cognizing the universe.
And accordingly,
the goal of life is to discover a fully adequate model of the universe.
How achievable this goal is, we'll explore further. But for now,
Summary.
Model of the universe is a reflection of the behavioral scheme that living beings adapt to maintain their homeostasis. Collective model of the universe is the most accurate representation of the universe that has emerged within a given ecosystem. Life is the continuous process of cognizing the universe. The goal of life is to discover a fully adequate model of the universe.
Chapter 4. What is God?
we've all wondered whether God exists, and if he does, what is he, or who is he? I am absolutely convinced that God exists, and I want to help the reader understand, at least on an intuitive, qualitative level, what God is, what his essence is, and to what extent we can rely on his help. To do this, let's use a metaphor, an analogy. Consider the complex multicellular organism of a higher warm-blooded animal, say a dog, a simple, sweet mutt named Missy. This organism consists of countless simple living beings, cells. You could say the organism is a society, a whole civilization of cells. In this society, there are energy-providing cells, worker cells, doctor cells, police cells, and many others filling various social roles, including, of course, government cells. These cells are born, live, and die with new generations taking their place. And reigning over this entire cellular society is a cellular God. This is the consciousness of our Missy. Some individuals might insist to call it soul, spirit, or even astral body. As I have a very weak idea what these mean, I will simply write the word consciousness in italics and with a capital letter. The cellular society, the organism, can only manage its internal problems, maintain homeostasis, under one condition, that food, carbohydrates, proteins, and various vitamins inexplicably appears in the digestive system at regular intervals. The cells have no idea where all this comes from. They simply assume it's a law of nature. They know that it must keep coming. But if food stops appearing for some time, the cells begin to pay attention now. Pray. They all pray together to the great God, hoping that he will hear them and throw some organic firewood into their beloved digestive furnace. And so we arrive at the answer. For the cells, God is simply the consciousness of our Missy. This consciousness reigns over the tiny cellular civilization that Missy innocently refers to as her body.
God is the consciousness of any living organism.
Let's note that Missy is far from the textbook God described by many monotheistic religions. Missy's consciousness is not one and only. There are plenty more mutts like her out there. Nor is it almighty. Our Missy can barely control even the simplest cells in her own body, muscle cells mostly, and even then, they say, not with full mastery. And Missy's consciousness is certainly not omnipresent. It would be quite a stretch to claim that it is present in all things visible to her divine gaze all at once. It's hard to claim that consciousness truly loves its body. After all, we're capable of smoking, drinking alcohol, using drugs, or engaging in physically dangerous sports. For example, at some point, usually after New Year's or before beach season, we might decide to shed a few pounds and, as a result, go on a strict diet. For ourselves, this diet is a disaster, a hurricane, a typhoon, an earthquake, a tsunami. On such days, our cells writhe in agony and die by the millions. They suffer and pray. Pray, pray, how much longer? Have mercy, O God. But we, despite the cries, moans, and pleas of our poor body, grit our teeth and heroically lose weight. In other words, when driven by desire or foolishness, God Missy can very well destroy her own body. But note this, the body can also destroy its God. For example, why not consider the terminal stage of cancer as the final victory of some kind of cellular Bolshevism in Missy's body? Continuing these reflections, we can imagine the vast, insurmountable chasm that lies between the world of individual cells and the kingdom of desires and emotions of Missy frolicking on the lawn. This qualitative leap is just as immense, monstrous, and unfathomable as the one that exists between us, humans, and our God. Only by grasping the incredible depth of this chasm can we begin to understand what exactly we can pray for to God, and how we might go about doing so. For example, it's pointless to ask God for your mischievous adult son to finally get married and give you grandchildren. This is like a single cell asking Missy, who's frolicking on the lawn, to pump a few molecules of glycogen into its cytoplasm. Missy has no idea that a particular cell even exists, let alone what glycogen is or why it's needed. No, dear reader, our God can only sense and understand quite powerful signals from his body, meaning the collective, simultaneous expression of pain or joy by millions of cells. Thus, the subjective realm of information, which we discussed in the chapter on energy and information, can quite reasonably also be called the realm of consciousnesses, or even the realm of gods. However, we will adhere to the more general term realm of information.
Summary.
God is the consciousness of any living organism. The realm of information can also be interpreted as the realm of consciousnesses, or even as the realm of gods. Dear friends, I'd love to hear your thoughts, your critiques, your ideas, and your reflections on the material we've already covered in previous videos. Also, if you've enjoyed any of the videos, please don't forget to like them, and maybe even share them with your friends. And of course, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel, New Paradigm of Life, so you don't miss what's coming next. But for now,
Chapter 5. Absolute Good and Evil.
The material in this chapter is not crucial to the rest of the book, so readers may consider it somewhat optional. However, I believe many readers have likely pondered the questions, what are good and evil, and do absolute good and evil even exist? So I wanted to share my thoughts on the subject. Most likely, the first thing that comes to mind for many is that good and evil are always relative and subjective. What seems good to me might easily appear evil to someone else. Indeed, in any war, there are two sides, and our understanding of good and evil depends directly on which side we associate ourselves with, right? Moreover, it often happens that something which was undoubtedly considered good yesterday becomes regarded as absolute evil today. And no, I'm not just talking about marriage. We should also note that over time, people's notions of honesty and justice evolve. For example, just 200 years ago, turning in a runaway slave to the authorities was seen as an honest act, and the very division of people into masters and slaves was considered entirely just. If we've agreed that life is a process of understanding the universe, and that the purpose of life is to find the fully adequate model of the universe, then we can assert that good and evil are also objective categories. There's a graph. Way off in the distance, there's the fully adequate model of the universe, the truth, something that does exist, but no one knows it yet. Now, here's our current collective model of the universe. As you can see, it's still far from being fully adequate. This collective model is constantly changing. Sometimes history brings us a little closer to the truth. Other times, we drift farther away. So here's the key idea.
Any actions that distance a given model of the universe from the fully adequate model of the universe are absolute evil. Any actions that bring a given model of the universe closer to the fully adequate model of the universe are absolute good.
Let's consider humanity and its historical deviations in social evolution as an example. We are all familiar with such obvious dead ends of human social evolution as Bolshevism, Nazism, or, for example, the bloody social experiments of Pol Pot. If we assume that the path of humanism brings us closer to the fully adequate model of the universe, then Nazism clearly led humanity away from that path. Thus, everything that worked to strengthen and protect Nazism was evil, and everything done to destroy Nazism was, accordingly, good. There are, of course, more complex examples where it is difficult to qualify certain events and actions as good or evil simply because no one knows the fully adequate model of the universe. For instance, it's hard to say whether the invention of nuclear weapons is good or evil. Nevertheless, this ambiguity is irrelevant. What matters is that an objective criterion for qualifying good and evil exists, and therefore, absolute good and evil objectively exist as well.
Summary.
Any actions that distance a given model of the universe from the fully adequate model of the universe are absolute evil. Any actions that bring a given model of the universe closer to the fully adequate model of the universe are absolute good. This video concludes the first part of the book, titled Basic Concepts. Ahead of you lie Part 2, Mechanisms of Life, and Part 3, Appendices. See you in Part 2, dear friends.